The Environment of Business, the External Environment. Unit 1, Chapter 3, Lesson 2, Part 1. When we spoke about Chapter 1, we discussed that the world is constantly changing, and of course this influences how the organization operates. When we're looking at the environment that the business operates in, there are several layers that we have to consider. The general environment is external to the organization and therefore affects it indirectly. And we will look at that in the next lecture. But it is important to think about how that influences the ecosystem the organization operates in. So of course there's an interaction in the community of organizations that form part of the same environment as the business. And then of course we have the internal environment, which is directly within the control of the managers of the organization because it falls within the organization's boundaries. Here you can see a visual representation of the organization's ecosystem. We'll start by mentioning the general environment, which is everything that occurs outside the organization, influences the organization, but which they cannot control. We will also look a little bit later at the internal environment. These are the things that occur within the boundaries of the organization and over which management has direct control. For now, we're going to focus on the task environment, which includes customers, competitors, suppliers, and the labor market. The general environment is also often referred to as the external or macro environment, and these terms are interchangeable. And the first dimension we're going to look at here is the international dimension. So an important component is globalization, a term that you've probably heard before. If we think about globalization as the phenomenon where international borders between countries are becoming less relevant in terms of trends and trade, then it's easy to see that this is a tremendous influence in the external environment. It means that competitors are no longer just companies from around the corner. It means that your customers could be placed somewhere else in the world, as could your suppliers. And it also means that you can take advantage of social, technological, and economic trends that originated somewhere else in the world. So it's really important for today's managers to compete and think globally. The next dimension of the external environment that we're looking at is technological. So if there are massive advancements in a specific industry, it will influence society. And these advances often drive competition and help innovative companies because it gives them market share. An interesting example of technological advances can be seen in the mobile phone. The first prototype was actually demonstrated by Motorola in 1973, but it was only commercially available in 1983. If you look at the smartphone that you're holding in your hand today, it's really come a long way in a very short space of time. So the rapid pace of technological change is also increasing. Your mobile phone can now, with the right apps, measure your heart rate, it can process mobile payments, it can help you stick to a diet, and it's probably more powerful than many computers that are out there today. The next dimension we're looking at is the sociocultural. And there are interesting variables at play here, the demographic characteristics, norms, customs, and values of a society. If you look at Generation Z and the millennials, we have a very connected generation where wearables that track your heart rate and the number of steps you take a day is not unusual and has become accepted very quickly. There are other interesting dynamics at play. If you look at developed countries, they often have an aging population. In Japan, they are, for example, at the forefront of developing robots to take care of the aged, as they have a very small youth population looking for employment in that sector. In emerging countries, we have an opposite dynamic at play, where we have a large youth population grappling with unemployment, and this brings different social dynamics into play. Growing diversity in the form of age, race, gender, really has interesting implications and opportunities that it presents to business. The next dimension is economic, and this is perhaps the most easily considered dimension of the external environment. It really reflects the economic health of the country or region that we are considering. There has been a growing sense of uncertainty with regards to economic growth, as there have been a number of recessions and economic contractions that have had an implication in different parts of the world, often with a ripple effect. And what businesses have to pay particular attention to is the consumer purchasing power. How do these variations in economic growth rates influence the ability of their customers to purchase their product? Other factors that influence the viability of the market could be the employment rate in a certain country, and of course the interest rates if people have to buy things on a long-term loan. But all of these are indicators of the economic health and the ease of competition in a certain market. The next dimension we're looking at is the legal political. This is influenced by government regulation, and in South Africa you would see this at municipal, provincial and country level. There are different political activities, government agencies and regulation that come into play. Think about rules about pollution, import taxes, protection of private property or private information, and you can already see the things that business has to take into consideration. We only need to think about Facebook's recent scandal selling, if you will, the details of their users to realize the influence of protection of personal information laws on technology companies. The last dimension we're looking at is natural, also sometimes referred to as the environmental dimension. Organizations are becoming more sensitive to the environment in which they operate, and at the same time there's a growing understanding of the importance of the natural world and also pressure on companies to behave in a responsible way. What's interesting about this dimension is it doesn't have its own voice, but there are advocacy groups that are trying to highlight the impact of businesses on the environment. So there is a lot of trendy talk about going green, reducing pollution, developing renewable energy. A lot of this comes from the insights that have been gleaned on global warming. And of course, essentially it's advocating a sustainable use of scarce resources. So companies want to decrease their carbon footprint, and in improving how they manage scarce resources, potentially they can also decrease their costs. Now that we've looked at the different components of the external environment, I just want to give you an easy way to remember them all. We break them up slightly differently to come up with a nice acronym. First, political, economic, sociocultural, technological, environmental, and legal. This is known as the PESTEL analysis. You'll note that we covered each of these elements in the preceding slides, but some of them have slightly different names or were grouped differently. But this is an easy way for you to remember them. The only thing that we've added here is a consideration of the international environment because it is so influential on the operations of the business.